Welcome to the Manic podcast, where we respect fashion's past, analyze fashion's present, and get excited about fashion's future. I'm Liberty Gateman, founder and creative principal of fashion media company Manic. Several times per week, I'll bring you episodes about exciting things happening in fashion, discussion about current issues facing the industry, and the places and people that have made the fashion industry great. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Instagram at the Manic Podcast and at Manic Metallic, both linked in our show notes. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the Manic podcast. I'm Liberty, your host. Today we're going to be talking about when world crises strike, how do those of us in fashion cope? I've actually found it difficult to become excited about fashion in recent days with the shocking violence being wrought upon Ukrainian people by Russian President Vladimir Putin. These actions are terrible, they're unjust, and Ukrainian people do not deserve what is happening to them right now in their country. And as a result, I've found it difficult to both talk about and write about the fashion industry, despite the fact that this is all happening during multiple fashion weeks and there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of content, but I just don't know what to say about fashion right now, really. I just don't. But I'm working through those feelings, and more podcasts are going to be following this week because there is a lot to talk about, as I mentioned, and I do want to get back into some fashion topics. So we're going to talk about 4 ways that people seem to be dealing with news of this recent conflict that Russia has wrought upon Ukraine. So the first way that people seem to be dealing with it is by, and one thing that I'll say before I get into these reasons, these are by no means comprehensive reasons, and also a lot of them can and do overlap. So just keep that in mind. So the first reason I have is checking out and pushing everything away. There's something that I've seen a few people doing online, and I know that a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on right now, but I've also seen quite a few people deciding, you know what, so much is going on, and this is all just really hard, really tough to deal with, and I'm just going to again, push everything away and just try to keep going. And I actually overlaps with another reason that I got later on, so just stick with me here. The second way that people seem to be dealing with this news is by helping in whatever way that they can. Now, there aren't a lot of ways that we as observers can help, but a few things that we can do that I've seen people doing are donating money. That's a huge help. I've seen a lot of resources being passed around on the various social media platforms, and that's a really good thing because the Ukrainian people really do need our help. Another way that people have been helping in just whatever way that they can is posting awareness on social media of what's going on. Posting news stories, posting explainer videos on, hey, this is what's happening, and this is why you should be concerned, and here's how to help. And one thing that I will say is that I don't necessarily think that it's always the most helpful thing for social media influencers to be posting videos about, for example, hey, this is what's going on in Ukraine, and this is what I think, and oh no, it's so sad, which it is. It is very sad. But I don't think that it's always helpful for them doing that. That being the case, many of us feel like we want to do something and we just don't know what. And to someone like a social media influencer, making content online is what they know how to do. And so that's their way of coping. So the third way that people seem to be dealing with this news is becoming anxious and worrying a lot. And I actually think that that's a lot of us. And in a way, I would include myself in that. I have tried not to worry too much, like not to over worry. But at the same time, this is a really delicate situation. it wouldn't be out of scope to be glued to the news and wonder, oh, what's going on now? Have the Russians closed in on Kyiv? Are the Ukrainian people okay? Like, what's happening? And that's a cycle that, while it is completely acceptable to keep up with the news and what's going on as much as you can, it can become really harmful to your mental health. So you just have to watch how much that you're consuming news and taking it in, because it can be really anxiety inducing. The fourth way that people seem to be dealing with news of this crises is by continuing on with life, maintaining a sense of normalcy. And that's similar to number one, where I mentioned that I've seen people checking out and pushing everything away. But the difference is that whereas people in the first way that people seem to be dealing, whereas they're pushing everything away, checking out, to me, that shows I'm going to reject reality. I'm going to reject that these things are happening. I'm just not going to pay attention. To me, that's more, I don't want to say the word malicious, but I feel like that's not a great course of action. Maybe what I'm looking for here is it shows no empathy. Now, what people in the fourth group here are doing, the way that they're dealing with things, continuing on with life and maintaining a sense of normalcy, you can do that. You can continue on with your normal life and maintain that sense of normalcy while also at the same time being concerned about what's going on and helping out in whatever way that you can. And, a decent amount of people are doing that, but I feel like that fourth group, in continuing on with life and maintaining that sense of normalcy, I feel like that fourth group can be confused with that first group, who's just checking out and pushing everything away, when that's not the case at all. The fourth group just wants to maintain normalcy in their life, and they want to help. They're not turning a blind eye to the plight of the Ukrainian people like people in group number one would be. So I just want to make that distinction. And I believe that it's important in times like this, when we have crises striking and we're all trying to figure out how to cope, it's really important to not judge other people for their coping mechanisms too harshly. Fashion, for example, serves as an escape for a lot of people, both inside the industry and outside the industry. For me, fashion serves as that to an extent, but this, for me personally, was not something that I felt that fashion provided an adequate enough escape for. That being the case, everyone reacts differently to these sorts of situations. And if fashion serves as that escape for a lot of different people, I don't think that it's right that we attempt to take that escape away. We shouldn't just say to people, you know what? You should be glued to the news cycle 24/7, monitoring what's going on and worrying and being anxious and just generally being afraid. And again, I think that there's a way to be concerned with what's going on and continue with your daily life, but also just making sure that you don't allow what's going on in the world, these crises, to overwhelm your mental sanity. I just don't agree with people these days that have been saying, oh, you know what? Fashion Week's going on and people are paying attention to fashion and they're continuing to live in that fairy tale world. And I mean, that's a whole different story. Like, what purpose does fashion serve? But I know that it serves as an escape for many, and we shouldn't take that away from people. And besides, beauty can soothe in a crisis. It can, and it does. And people deal with things differently. We need to allow them to do that. Many people hide their grief. Many people grieve in silence. We never know what people are dealing with and how they're dealing with it. We all need to give each other a lot more grace, to be honest. The world is so chaotic, and this is such a devastating tragedy happening in Ukraine right now that, again, we all have our own ways of dealing with it. Let's not be judgmental. That's going to be the end of this episode. Tune in for the next one, where we'll have a Who Is series for you. And until then, see you next time. Thanks for listening. If you got value out of today's episode, It'd mean a lot to me if you'd rate, review, and subscribe to the Manic podcast. Be sure to tell all of your fashion-inclined friends and coworkers about the podcast as well. This would really help us to spread our message about fashion being an art, discipline, and force for societal change. And don't forget to stay in touch with us by subscribing to the Manic newsletter and following us on Instagram. Feel free to reach out to us through either of those means. I'd love to hear from you. I'll link these all in the show notes. You're the best. See you next episode.